I had carried this house for years, so I had to remind him whose name was on it.
When my husband told me, without looking up from the newspaper, that his mother needed my bedroom, something small and ordinary inside me tightened like a fist. How do you hand over the room you sleep in for 30 years because someone else decided it was convenient? I asked him a question I already knew the answer to: whose name was on the house? I told that first line like it happened in a single afternoon, but the story lived in a long, slow erosion of small things: the unpaid favors, the shrugged promises, the tiny humiliations that stack until you notice them like dust on a windowsill. This is an emotional story about a quiet life that learned how to say no without shouting. It is a real-life story of love, duty, and the small, steady dignity of one woman who had given everything she could for family and still had to protect what was hers. I had married young, the way many of us in my town did, with a song in the radio, a bit of thrift, and a lot of hope. We bought our little house when my first child was just 2, scraping together down payments from savings, gifts from parents, and 2 stable paychecks. It was modest, a 2-bedroom bungalow with a chipped sink and a stubborn porch light. But it was ours, not because someone made it a palace, but because we painted it every spring and planted tomatoes along the fence and learned how to sweep cheerfully no matter the weather. We raised children on that linoleum kitchen floor. We argued about who would wash the dishes and forgave each other for the forgetting. My husband worked long hours so I could stay home and knit dinners and mend school uniforms and watch over scraped knees. I braided hair on Sunday mornings and ironed shirts late at night. I kept a ledger of household expenses in a spiral notebook and tucked receipts in envelopes to make sense of the bills. Money was always thin, but we had routines and a small shared pride: the name on the mortgage, the name on the mailbox, the key under the same crooked stone. In the beginning, his mother lived 2 hours away and visited for holidays, the kind of mother-in-law you say you like because she brought pies and stories. As the years passed, her health frayed. Small things became bigger: a missed doctor's appointment, a fall, confusion over the phone. When she first suggested moving closer, it felt reasonable. We had the empty bedroom, the one my daughter had left when she married, and I said yes because that was what we did. We made room for the people we loved, even when it cost something. The moral fault line that would open later was not dramatic at first. It was the way favors were counted and memory blurred. It was the way we became you in little sentences. It was the way my husband, who loved me and had always been capable of tenderness, began to assume that my patience was infinite. I didn't feel betrayed yet. I felt tired in the way a person does after years of holding the laundry basket alone while everyone else is asleep. I told myself that love sometimes asks for sacrifice, and I made room. The day the betrayal arrived, it wore the colors of ordinary speech. We were sitting at the kitchen table. The sun came through the blinds and made stripes on the tablecloth. I had just bought bread and a jar of coffee and had a small stack of bills that needed attention. He set his paper down and said casually, "Mom needs your bedroom. She should stay here. You can take the couch or the guest room." I remember the pause, the small clink of his coffee cup against the saucer. "What do you mean she should stay here?" I asked. I tried for calm. He folded the newspaper like he always did and looked at me as if I had misread the weather. "She's getting older," he said. "It's easier if she's here." He shrugged a little, as if the decision had already been made by fate. It was a public slight wrapped in private words. The betrayal was not because he wanted his mother close. That was understandable. It was that a lifetime of shared decisions, the mortgage, the garden, the hospital runs, the small celebrations, suddenly seemed like other people's input. I had given time, energy, care, and the roof over our heads. The comment felt like a step toward erasure: my presence, my needs, and my history in that house reduced to an inconvenience. The sentence landed, and I saw, suddenly and clearly, how our roles had shifted in ways I hadn't noticed. In the weeks that followed, the pressure built like summer thunder. There were 3 small storms that convinced me this was more than a single careless remark. The first was the shopping list. After the suggestion to give up my bedroom, he began to make decisions about furniture and meals without asking. He called the furniture store and arranged for an extra recliner for Mom, and told me with a half smile that our storage closet would be perfect for her walker. The boxes arrived and the house began to change in ways that made my footsteps feel foreign in my own rooms. I would find appointment notices for the doctor on the hallway table with her name on them, and when I asked about the dates, he would say, "Oh, I put those dates in." The second was the constant, small inconvenience disguised as concern. I cooked meals and set an extra plate because we don't want her to feel left out. Then I noticed the plate stayed at the counter for hours, leftovers growing colder because no one had asked if she was hungry. I would clear the table and find my own favorite mug put away at the back of the cupboard with a note, "For when Mom visits." Little adjustments that were meant to smooth life became evidence that my routines were being reallocated without my consent. The third storm, the one that left a small but lasting bruise, was the way friends and neighbors began to treat the house as though it had multiple owners of equal claim. Invitations to lunch were directed to the family, calls meant for me were routed to his phone, and casual visitors asked about his mother's room as a fiat accomplice. I started to notice receipts for home modifications that had my husband's signature and dates that matched the afternoons when I had been at the dentist. He would tell me later it was just logistics, and I would nod because arguing in the grocery aisle felt cheap. But it kept happening. The garden had a new bench for Mom, the guest room had softer sheets, and the name on my mail started to look smaller in my own eyes. These were not dramatic betrayals, they were the quotidian kind, the ones that wear at your self-respect. They were the times I answered the phone and heard, "Is your husband home? We need to talk about moving her here." Each small erasure made my world narrower and louder at the same time. I started keeping a paper trail because remembering becomes a weapon when you suspect you will be asked to surrender more than you are willing to give. The private costs were what the public could not see. I kept a little folder in the top drawer with utility bills, the mortgage statement, and the deed paperwork we had signed decades ago. It was a habit of order more than suspicion. I had paid bills, I had signed checks, I had taken kids to school, and our name had been on that mailbox for years. But now the quiet assumption in the house was that ownership was flexible, that rooms could be reassigned like furniture. There was a night I cried silently into my pillow because I felt ridiculous for being angry at small things. I'm not proud of the way resentment crept in, it felt like a betrayal of myself. I thought back to the nights I had stayed up with sick children and the afternoons I had given up for his work schedule. I tried to tell myself I was being dramatic, that love meant making adjustments, that families rearrange themselves for care and kindness. But one more small thing happened that made resignation impossible. He left a note on the kitchen table in his quick, tidy handwriting. "Moving day for Mom next Saturday. We will shift things around. Don't worry, I took care of the paperwork." The casualness of the note felt like a slap. He had arranged everything without talking to me, not even a call, not a conversation, just a line on paper that assumed my compliance. That was the turning point. I realized it wasn't just about a bedroom. It was about what it meant to be respected and seen in your own life. I decided I was not willing to be edited out of my own story. The midpoint came in the gentle, quiet way these things sometimes do, through a discovery that reoriented the entire landscape. I had always kept the spiral notebook of household expenses and a small manila folder with important papers on the top shelf of my closet, wrapped in a tea towel to keep them clean. It included boxes of things: birth certificates, insurance papers, the mortgage statement, and a photocopy of the deed that for years had sat in a safe deposit box across town. One afternoon, when I was looking for a particular utility bill, the towel slipped and the manila folder fell wide open. There, between a folded prom photograph and a receipt for curtains, was the original copy of the deed to the house. The ink was faded at the edges and the paper smelled faintly of dust, but my name was written there, my full name, in my handwriting where I had signed 30 years earlier when we finalized the mortgage. His name was on the mortgage, yes, We had paid it together, but the ownership, had been placed in my name years ago after a discussion we had had in the middle of a hard winter when jobs were uncertain and we had wanted to protect our family. I remembered that conversation now, how we had agreed to put the title in my name because my father had advised it as a safeguard, how we had laughed and felt proud of our small bit of prudence. Seeing my name on that page was like the first cool rain after a long drought. It reframed everything. It was not just a legal fact, it was a memory and a promise that linked me back to myself. I sat down on the floor and held the paper as if it were a fragile heirloom. In that moment, the story shifted, not because I wanted to brandish a victory, but because I finally saw the truth of what I had. A quiet, ordinary power I had nearly forgotten I carried. I also found, tucked behind those papers, an old letter from my husband. It was affectionate and careless in the way letters between young people often are, promising to build a life, to care, to be partners. I read it and felt that warmth, but also a sorrow. We had veered from that path in ways neither of us had planned. The deed in my hands did not erase the years of care we had both given to his mother. Instead, it reframed my responsibility. I could be compassionate without being erased. After the discovery, I did not roar like a tigress or scheme in secret. I moved slowly and with deliberation because that is how I had always operated. A list, a call, a small step repeated until a larger change took place. My plan was composed of dignified, lawful, and practical steps. I would not make a spectacle of myself. I wanted to hold the high moral ground because my life and reputation mattered to me, and in small towns, dignity is currency. First, I organized the paperwork. I made copies of the deed, the mortgage statements, our tax records, and any notes I could find that showed contributions to the mortgage and maintenance. I put everything neatly in a binder labeled with the year in big black letters, so if anyone asked I could find it quickly. It felt almost ceremonial to arrange those papers. Each page reminded me of years of steady work and commitment. Second, I opened conversations with people who mattered. I called a close friend who had been with me through the early years, and told her plainly what had been happening and how I felt. She listened and then helped me practice what to say to my husband in a way that didn't escalate into argument. I phoned my sister and we talked about boundaries and how to assert them kindly. The allies I chose were people who knew our family and who would not turn a private trouble into gossip. Choosing allies felt like assembling a small, trustworthy team. Third, I decided on my words. I rehearsed short sentences that were honest and calm. I would not shout, I would not accuse, I would say, I understand we need to help your mother and I am willing to do that. But we will not rearrange our home or our lives without discussing it together. I practiced saying, we've shared this house for years, we should make decisions together. And I practiced holding the deed in my hand like a talisman of truth so that if the conversation shifted into blame, I could return to facts. Fourth, I planned logistics. I researched local senior resources, quietly places that offered respite care, home health aides, community support groups. I did not want to be the only person responsible for every need that might come up. There were ways to care for someone with help. We did not have to collapse as a family into the impossible. Thinking this through calmed me and gave me options to offer instead of a simple refusal. Finally, I timed the conversation. I waited for a moment when my husband was not tired and when the house was quiet. I wanted presence and attention, not distracted compliance. The plan was not to ambush, but to present a calm, organized, reasonable path forward. The morning of our conversation, I brewed coffee and sat the deed and binder on the table like an understated prop. The house smelled of toast and old wood and sunlight. He came in from the garage with a newspaper tucked under his arm and the easy assumption I had come to dread. I invited him to sit and put the binder between us. I know you want mom clothes, I began. I don't begrudge that. I want to help, but I can't be the only plan. I want us to make this decision together. I could see him leaning back, the familiar mix of impatience and care on his face. He started to reply with the same casual tone he had used the first time, but I held up my hand gently. I found the deed, I said. It was a small statement, plain as a receipt. His eyebrows climbed. Our house is in my name. I placed the paper on the table, careful not to make the moment a weapon, but to make it true and visible. The surprise on his face made an odd, soft ripple in the quiet. He said, I didn't know. It was not a defensive line. It was an honest admission. I told him how it had come to be, the conversation years ago with my father, the decision we had made in winter. I didn't wave the document like a flag. I showed it like proof that I had a stake, both practical and emotional, in the life of this home. Then I shared my plan. I offered the alternatives I had researched: home health aides who could visit several times a day, a community day program where his mother could be active and social, a rotating schedule of visits so that no single person bore the whole load. I explained the costs calmly, the changes to our routines, and how we could share them fairly. I laid out the binder of receipts and notes to show that decisions about the house and money had always been shared, and that I was asking for shared decisions again. He listened. He sat with his hands on the table, and for the first time in weeks we had a conversation that felt like partnership instead of a procession. He apologized for arranging things without me. He admitted he had been trying to make things smooth and ended up making an assumption. We did not solve everything in 1 hour, but we mapped a path forward. There was a moment of quiet where he said softly, "I didn't realize how much I'd put on you." I told him about the nights I had cried into a pillow and about the receipt I found in the closet, the one that had all the tiny proof of our life together. He squeezed my hand, and we made a new list of calls to make, of appointments to schedule, of neighborhood friends who could help. He agreed that his mother would not move in until we both agreed on the terms. The climax was not dramatic. There was no shouting or courtroom theatrics. The decisive thing was simply that we returned to being partners and that I did not have to surrender my place. We made arrangements that respected his mother's needs, my dignity, and our marriage. The deed on the table was a quiet reminder that ownership had many faces: legal, practical, and emotional, and that all deserved recognition. In the weeks that followed, life settled into a new rhythm. We arranged for in-home help twice a day, and his mother came over sometimes for dinner and sometimes for a weekend. We rotated care with neighbors and friends, and my husband took responsibility for scheduling visits with a hand that now seemed more mindful. He stopped assuming, he asked. The moral I discovered was not about property lines or winning a small, private victory. It was about boundaries and respect, about how love should not ask you to vanish. I learned that saying no softly can be an act of care for myself and for the others I love. I found that dignity was not a thing to be defended with fury, but a steady practice through paperwork, calm conversation, and small daily acts. There were days of tenderness, too. I would make a second pot of tea without resentment and sit with my mother-in-law while she told the same story for the third time, and sometimes I would tell it with her. Those moments reminded me why I had said yes to care in the first place. Because love is generous, even when it is complicated. My husband learned to speak differently. He began to ask instead of tell. Our children noticed, and they said later that the house felt kinder. Looking back, the deed on the shelf was never what saved us. It was the willingness to take stock of a lifetime of small choices and to insist that those choices be honored. It was the work of turning quiet indignation into organized, honest conversation. I reminded him in the end whose name was on the house, but I added something else: whose heart had carried it all these years. We had both carried it. We both had to choose how to carry it forward. A small act of grace sealed the change. On a warm evening when his mother had been laughing at an old joke, my husband came to me and said, "Thank you for holding this together." I replied, "We held it together, and we will keep holding it together." That was the resolution: not revenge, not triumph, but partnership renewed. Moral resolution: set boundaries with kindness, document your life, and ask for what you need. This family drama taught me that you can be both compassionate and clear, and that a real-life story of care often includes a quiet insistence on being seen. Thank you for listening. If this emotional story touched you or reminded you of something in your life, please share it below. Soulbyte is here for stories like this, small, honest, and true. If you found this helpful, please like, comment, and subscribe to Soulbyte for more real-life stories and family drama told from the heart.